In the autumn of 1973, beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of a private gymnasium in Hong Kong's industrial district, two men prepared to engage in what the assembled observers believed would be a demonstration of mutual respect and technical excellence. The air hung heavy with anticipation, and the familiar scent of canvas mats, leather equipment, and the accumulated sweat of countless previous sessions. This gymnasium, tucked away from the bustling commercial districts and tourist areas, served as neutral ground for encounters that existed outside the formal structures of competition and instruction. Bruce Lee, at 33, had already transcended the traditional boundaries between martial artist and cultural icon. Yet he approached this particular sparring session with the same methodical preparation that had defined his evolution from street fighter to philosopher of combat. His movements during warm-up carried the fluid economy that had become his signature, each gesture serving multiple purposes while revealing nothing of his internal state to potential opponents who might be studying his habits and tendencies. Every aspect of his preparation reflected years of refinement and philosophical development. The way he moved through his stretches demonstrated not just physical conditioning, but a deep understanding of the interconnectedness between mental state and physical capability. His breathing patterns established rhythm and focus, while his positioning revealed constant tactical awareness, even during seemingly routine preparatory exercises. The invitation had come through intermediaries, practitioners who moved in the shadowed spaces between traditional schools and modern competition. These were men who understood that the most valuable lessons often occurred away from public attention, in settings where reputations were tested without the protective structures of formal rules and official oversight. His opponent carried credentials that spoke to years of dedication and achievement, but also to a career built in environments where the margin between victory and defeat could be measured in split seconds and fractional advantages. This champion represented something different from the opponent's Bruce Lee, typically encountered in demonstrations or teaching situations. He was not a student seeking knowledge or a colleague pursuing mutual development, but rather a predator who had built his reputation through systematic exploitation of any weakness he could identify. His victories were celebrated not for their beauty or technical innovation, but for their decisive finality and the psychological impact they had on future opponents who heard the stories of his encounters. The champion's approach to martial arts reflected a fundamentally different philosophy than what Bruce Lee had developed through his own journey. Where Bruce Lee sought integration of mind, body, and spirit in pursuit of personal development, his opponent viewed combat as a zero-sum game, where victory justified any method that remained within the technical boundaries of plausible deniability. He had learned to exploit the gray areas between legal and illegal, ethical and unethical, turning regulatory ambiguity into tactical advantage. Bruce Lee understood the nature of such encounters with crystalline clarity. They were rarely about learning or growth, despite the careful language used in their arrangement. They were about validation, about the need to test oneself against a standard that existed beyond the comfortable boundaries of one's established domain. He accepted such challenges because he believed that true understanding emerged only through direct engagement with opposing forces that could expose the gaps between theoretical knowledge and practical application. The gymnasium held perhaps 30 witnesses, practitioners and enthusiasts, who had gathered through whispered invitations and careful arrangements. These men represented the serious underground of Hong Kong's martial arts community, students and teachers, who understood that the most valuable lessons often occurred in settings far removed from public attention or commercial considerations. No cameras recorded the session. No official documentation would survive. This was the way of such meetings, existing in the spaces between formal competition and private instruction, where reputations could be enhanced or destroyed without the complications of public scrutiny. The atmosphere carried an undercurrent of tension that distinguished this gathering from typical training sessions or friendly exchanges. Those present understood that they were about to witness something that could not be replicated in controlled environments or academic settings. This was combat distilled to its essential elements, stripped of the protective structures that normally govern such encounters, and reduced to the fundamental question of which man possessed superior capability when those capabilities were tested under genuine pressure. Bruce Lee moved through his preliminary stretches with characteristic precision, each movement flowing into the next, with mechanical efficiency that disguised the profound complexity of the preparations taking place. His routine served multiple purposes simultaneously, warming specific muscle groups, testing range of motion under current conditions, establishing the breathing patterns that would sustain him through extended effort, and creating the mental state necessary for optimal performance under stress. He had learned long ago that physical preparation was inseparable from psychological readiness, that the body and mind constituted a single integrated system that required unified attention and coordinated development. His approach to preparation revealed the comprehensive methodology he had developed for approaching any challenge that required integration of mind, body, and spirit in pursuit of excellence. This was not merely preparation for a sparring session, but rather the application of a systematic framework for achieving optimal performance under pressure. Every movement, every breath, every moment of focus contributed to the construction of an internal state that would allow him to respond to whatever challenges emerged with maximum effectiveness and minimum waste of energy or attention. His opponent carried himself with the supreme confidence of someone accustomed to imposing his will through superior conditioning and tactical ruthlessness, broader through the shoulders, heavier through the torso, carrying the kind of functional strength that developed through years of actual combat rather than theoretical study. He possessed the physical advantages that had served him well in environments where such attributes mattered more than technical subtlety or philosophical sophistication. His preparation was efficient and professional, but carried an undertone that suggested this encounter represented something more significant than friendly exchange or mutual education. The champion's reputation had been built through consistent application of methods that existed at the margins of acceptable practice. He understood the rules that governed formal competition, but he also understood the spaces between those rules, where advantage could be gained through careful exploitation of regulatory gaps and referee limitations. His victories were often attributed to superior conditioning or tactical intelligence, but those who had faced him recognized patterns that suggested a more complex and ethically ambiguous approach to gaining advantage over opponents. The referee, a respected practitioner in his own right, with decades of experience in both formal competition and informal settings, outlined the parameters that would govern their engagement. Light contact only, no strikes to the throat or groin, no sustained grappling that could lead to injury, no techniques intended to cause permanent harm rather than demonstrate superior skill. These were standard protocols for such meetings, agreements that preserved both safety and dignity while allowing genuine assessment of relative ability under controlled conditions. The rules were explained with careful attention to detail, each restriction clarified to ensure that both participants understood the boundaries within which their encounter would take place. These protocols had evolved through years of experience, representing the accumulated wisdom of practitioners who understood that meaningful testing required structure, while uncontrolled violence served no constructive purpose. They created a framework within which skill could be demonstrated, character could be revealed, and lessons could be learned without the permanent consequences that might result from unrestricted combat. Bruce Lee nodded his understanding, as he always did when rules were explained. Regardless of the setting or the specific nature of the engagement, rules represented more than mere convenience or safety considerations in his philosophical framework. They embodied the fundamental recognition that martial arts existed to develop character as much as capability. That true strength emerged not from the absence of restraint, but from the conscious choice to exercise it appropriately under challenging circumstances. His respect for rules extended beyond simple compliance to embrace the deeper principles they represented. Rules created the structure within which genuine testing became possible, establishing boundaries that allowed participants to explore their capabilities without descending into the chaos of uncontrolled violence. They reflected agreements between human beings who recognized their mutual humanity, even while preparing to test themselves against each other. Most importantly, they provided the context within which character could be revealed through the choices made when advantage might be gained through their violation. The first exchanges proceeded exactly as anticipated by those who understood the dynamics of such encounters. Clean techniques, executed with professional precision, measured distance maintained to prevent accidental injury, formal acknowledgement of successful techniques that demonstrated superior timing or positioning. Bruce Lee found his rhythm quickly, his movements flowing between defensive responses and offensive initiatives, with the seamless transitions that had become his distinctive signature throughout years of development and refinement. His opponent matched him initially, demonstrating the fundamental skills and tactical understanding that had earned his reputation and established his position within circles where such credentials carried genuine meaning. The early moments revealed a practitioner of considerable ability, someone who had invested years in developing the physical capabilities and mental discipline necessary to compete at the highest levels of serious martial arts engagement. But within the first minute of actual contact, something subtle yet unmistakable began to emerge in the pattern of their exchange. A hand that lingered perhaps a fraction of a second too long near the throat during what appeared to be a standard clinch attempt. Fingers that probed with suspicious precision toward the eyes during what should have been a straightforward defensive sequence. Pressure applied to joints in ways that exceeded the boundaries of controlled demonstration, testing the limits of what could be dismissed as incidental contact or overzealous execution. These infractions were executed with sophisticated timing and positioning that made them difficult to detect for casual observers. They occurred during moments of complex movement when multiple techniques were being executed simultaneously, creating natural cover for actions that violated the agreed-upon parameters. The violations were calibrated to achieve maximum tactical advantage while maintaining sufficient ambiguity to avoid obvious detection by the referee or assembled witnesses. These were not accidental occurrences, or the inevitable result of intense competition between skilled practitioners. They were deliberate violations, executed with sufficient technical sophistication and tactical ambiguity that casual observation might dismiss them as natural consequences of vigorous exchange between committed opponents. But to someone with Bruce Lee's depth of experience and analytical capability, the pattern was immediately recognizable for what it represented. Bruce Lee recognized each transgression, not just as it occurred, but often before it fully materialized. His awareness operated on multiple levels simultaneously, processing not just the immediate physical threat, but the psychological intention behind it, the strategic purpose it served within his opponent's larger tactical framework, and the ethical choice it represented about how this encounter would be conducted. His opponent was not simply testing boundaries or probing for reactions, but systematically establishing patterns that could be escalated if they proved effective in gaining psychological or tactical advantage. The detection of these violations required not just technical knowledge, but philosophical framework for understanding their significance. Bruce Lee recognized that his opponent was not merely seeking victory within the established parameters, but attempting to redefine those parameters through systematic exploitation. Each violation served as both tactical maneuver and psychological test, designed to elicit specific responses that would provide additional advantages in subsequent exchanges. The revelation brought neither surprise nor anger to someone who had encountered such behavior before, in environments where winning mattered more than the methods employed to achieve it. Some practitioners operated from the fundamental belief that rules were suggestions rather than requirements, that competitive advantage could be gained through careful exploitation of regulatory gaps and the natural limitations of referee oversight. They viewed such tactics not as violations of agreed-upon standards, but as demonstrations of tactical intelligence and competitive commitment. A second sequence of exchanges confirmed his initial assessment with absolute clarity. What appeared to observers as an inadvertent elbow carried too much concentrated force and targeted anatomical structures that should have remained completely off-limits, according to the established parameters. A throw attempt included pressure point manipulation that exceeded the bounds of sporting competition and entered territory more appropriate to actual combat situations. A striking combination concluded with follow-through that suggested genuine intent to cause harm, rather than simply demonstrate technical superiority. The referee, positioned at an angle that provided optimal oversight of the general flow of the encounter, but limited visibility of the most subtle technical details, noticed none of these increasingly obvious violations of the established protocols. The audience, positioned at various angles around the gymnasium, but lacking the close proximity and technical sophistication necessary to recognize the difference between vigorous competition and systematic rule violation, continued to observe what they believed was spirited but fundamentally fair competition between two highly skilled practitioners. Only Bruce Lee possessed the unique combination of experience, positioning, and technical knowledge necessary to recognize the full scope and systematic nature of what was occurring. His opponent was not simply pushing boundaries or testing limits, but engaging in a deliberate campaign of escalating violations designed to provoke either retaliation or submission. Each transgression served the dual purpose of gaining immediate tactical advantage, while psychologically pressuring his opponent to abandon the ethical framework that might constrain his own responses. His options crystallized with absolute clarity as the true nature of the encounter became undeniable. He could respond in kind, matching violation with violation, and escalating the encounter until it devolved into the brutal contest his opponent clearly preferred and was actively working to create. He possessed both the technical skill and combat knowledge necessary to exploit weaknesses with devastating efficiency, to demonstrate that two could play such games with very different outcomes when the restraints were removed and the encounter descended to its most primitive level. The option of retaliation carried significant tactical advantages. Bruce Lee's technical capability exceeded his opponent's in virtually every measurable category, meaning that an unrestricted encounter would likely result in decisive victory. His superior speed, timing, and tactical sophistication would prove overwhelming once ethical constraints were abandoned. The psychological satisfaction of demonstrating this dominance would be considerable, particularly given the systematic nature of the provocations he was enduring. Alternatively, he could expose the violations through dramatic reaction, calling immediate attention to each transgression until the referee was forced to acknowledge what was happening and intervene according to the established protocols. This approach would preserve the formal structure of the match, while potentially embarrassing his opponent and damaging the carefully maintained fiction of mutual respect that governs such encounters in the eyes of the assembled observers. But both responses violated fundamental principles that had guided his development for more than a decade and shaped his understanding of what martial arts should represent at their highest level. Retaliation would make him complicit in the degradation of the encounter, reducing him to the same ethical level as his opponent and abandoning the standards that distinguished serious martial arts from simple violence. Public humiliation would serve his ego rather than any legitimate educational purpose, creating spectacle rather than demonstrating the principles he sought to embody and teach. Instead, Bruce Lee made a different decision, one that required far greater sophistication and self-discipline than either of the more obvious alternatives. He would prevail without compromising his principles, control the encounter without destroying his opponent, and demonstrate that superior skill could overcome unethical tactics without requiring their adoption. It was a choice that demanded greater precision, more sophisticated timing, and deeper self-control than simple retaliation would have required. But it was also the only choice consistent with the person he had worked to become through years of disciplined practice and philosophical development. This decision represented the culmination of decades of training that had focused not just on developing technical capability, but on building character that could withstand testing under extreme pressure. The choice to maintain ethical standards while facing systematic violations required integration of philosophical understanding with practical application that few practitioners ever achieved. It demanded trust in principles that had been developed through study and reflection, but never before tested under such challenging circumstances. The shift in his approach was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who understood the psychological and tactical nuances of combat at the highest level. His movements became more economical, his positioning more fundamentally defensive, his timing more precisely calibrated to neutralize threats before they could fully develop. Where before he had engaged in the typical give-and-take exchange characteristic of such sessions, he now began to systematically neutralize his opponent's advantages while denying opportunities for further rule violations. An attempted throat strike found only empty air, as Bruce Lee's head moved with minimal displacement, but perfect timing, creating the appearance of a near miss, while actually representing precise defensive positioning. An illegal joint manipulation encountered resistance that redirected force without creating the dramatic reaction that might have exposed the violation to observers, or provided his opponent with the psychological satisfaction of a successful transgression. Eye threats were answered with positioning that protected vulnerable areas while maintaining the flow of apparently legitimate exchange. His opponent recognized the fundamental change in the encounter's dynamic almost immediately, though he initially misinterpreted its significance and implications. What had begun as a systematic test of boundaries and exploitation of regulatory gaps was rapidly becoming an exercise in complete futility. Every violation was not just anticipated, but neutralized before it could achieve any tactical or psychological purpose. Every illegal technique was rendered ineffective through positioning and timing that seemed to predict his intentions before they were fully formed. The psychological pressure of failing repeatedly in areas where success had been confidently expected began to manifest in increasingly obvious ways. His breathing became labored more quickly than his physical conditioning alone could explain, indicating that mental stress was consuming energy reserves at an accelerated rate. His movements lost their initial precision and tactical coherence as frustration overcame the technical discipline that had been developed through years of systematic training. His timing suffered dramatically as mental focus shifted from execution to problem solving, from implementing practiced techniques to desperately searching for solutions to problems he had never before encountered. The champion who had entered this encounter with such supreme confidence, who had built his reputation through the systematic exploitation of opponents' weaknesses and regulatory limitations, was experiencing something entirely outside the range of his previous experience. He was facing someone who not only recognized every violation as it occurred, but who possessed the technical capability and ethical framework necessary to neutralize such tactics without descending to the same level of behavior. Bruce Lee maintained his composure throughout this psychological transformation in his opponent, his expression and body language revealing nothing of his internal assessment or emotional response to the increasingly desperate tactics being employed against him. He had learned long ago that the most devastating and educational victories occurred when opponents essentially defeated themselves, when their own limitations, poor choices, and ethical compromises created the conditions for their inevitable downfall. The audience began to sense that something extraordinary was occurring. Though few possessed the technical background or analytical capability necessary to articulate exactly what they were witnessing, the expected rhythm of attack and counterattack, the natural ebb and flow of competitive engagement between skilled practitioners, had been replaced by something more subtle and complex. One man appeared to be working increasingly hard while accomplishing increasingly little, while the other seemed to be expending minimal effort while controlling every significant aspect of the encounter. By the midpoint of their session, the dynamic had become unmistakable to anyone with even basic understanding of combat psychology and tactical flow. Bruce Lee was no longer participating in a sparring session, but conducting a comprehensive clinic in tactical superiority and psychological dominance. Every movement served multiple purposes simultaneously. Every response demonstrated several fundamental principles at once. Every moment revealed new dimensions of the gap between apparent ability and actual mastery when tested under genuine pressure. His opponent's violations became progressively more desperate and more obvious as his original strategy proved not just inadequate, but counterproductive. What had begun as subtle exploitation of regulatory gaps had degraded into increasingly blatant attempts to gain advantage through methods that would have resulted in immediate disqualification in any formal competition. But even these more aggressive and obvious transgressions found no purchase against defensive systems that seemed to anticipate and neutralize them before they could develop sufficient momentum to pose genuine threats. The referee, finally beginning to notice the increasingly one-sided nature of the encounter and the visible frustration building in one of the participants, prepared to intervene according to established protocols for managing sessions that had deviated from their intended purpose. But before he could act decisively, Bruce Lee brought the entire session to its conclusion with a sequence of movements that demonstrated the full extent of his superiority without causing injury or unnecessary embarrassment to his opponent. A series of what appeared to casual observation as purely defensive responses actually guided his increasingly desperate opponent into a position where any further aggression would be not just futile but impossible to execute without exposing himself to immediate and decisive counteraction. This was accomplished not through dramatic technique or spectacular display that might have provided entertainment for the assembled observers, but through the simple application of superior positioning, timing, and tactical understanding that made the reality of their relative capabilities undeniably clear. His opponent, finally recognizing his position and the complete futility of any further effort within the established framework, stepped back with whatever dignity remained available to him under the circumstances. The session concluded with the formal acknowledgments and traditional courtesies that established protocol required, though both participants understood with absolute clarity that nothing about this encounter had proceeded according to the expectations that had governed its arrangement. The audience dispersed with the satisfied confusion of those who had witnessed something genuinely significant without possessing the background necessary to fully comprehend its true nature or implications. They had expected to observe two skilled practitioners test themselves against each other in a demonstration of mutual respect and technical excellence. Instead, they had observed a masterclass in the application of fundamental principles under genuine pressure, though few possessed the technical sophistication or philosophical framework necessary to recognize what they had actually seen. Bruce Lee completed his post-session routine with the same methodical attention and systematic precision he had brought to his preliminary preparation. Each stretch served its specific physiological purpose, each controlled movement contributing to the physical and mental transition from combat readiness to normal awareness and social interaction. But his thoughts remained focused on the choices he had made during the encounter and their larger implications for his ongoing development as both martial artist and human being. He had been tested in ways that extended far beyond questions of physical skill or technical knowledge, beyond issues of conditioning or tactical sophistication. The challenge had been fundamentally ethical rather than athletic, psychological rather than purely tactical. His opponent had systematically offered him opportunities to abandon his principles in exchange for easier victory, to demonstrate his superiority through adoption of the same questionable methods that had been employed against him. The consistent refusal of such opportunities represented a different kind of victory, one that could not be measured through conventional scorekeeping or celebrated through dramatic gesture or public recognition. It was the victory of character over convenience, of principle over expediency, of the person he had consciously chosen to become over the reactive patterns his extensive training had made available to him. In the days and weeks that followed, word of the encounter spread through the intricate networks that connected serious practitioners throughout Hong Kong and the broader international martial arts community. But the stories that emerged and gained circulation bore little resemblance to what had actually occurred within the walls of that gymnasium. Some claimed to have witnessed a spectacular demonstration of superior technique and tactical brilliance. Others spoke of psychological warfare and mental domination that transcended purely physical considerations. The rules were broken. Bruce Lee was not.